Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Wow, it's really hard for me to connect to YouTube. I don't know why. Perhaps they're just not down with what I want to say shoveling, but I probably shouldn't. Anyway, once again, welcome to Robservations, episode number 409. I, of course, am your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your sommelier of cinema, your Archbishop of Banterbury, and remember, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you, robcasting at you from the Robservatory, at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Happy to be here, happy to persevere. Apparently right now the stream is still healthy. I'm just going to assume you can see and hear me. I mean, considering all this incredible technology we have, from what I understand, YouTube has 4 times the amount of people live streaming and doing all those things that they do here on YouTube. And if you think about what it is they're actually providing, but let's face it, this channel does pay for the service. So I like it when I can actually get on and avail myself of that service. Anyway, it's great to be here with all of you. Few things off the top that I wanted to discuss. One of them is an article that was in the Hollywood Reporter today. And it's a point of view that I've held that is an unpopular one, and I figured I'd just bring it to your attention. And that is, of course, that Iron Man 2 is a better movie than you might remember. So this is on Heat Vision in the Hollywood Reporter today, their section Heat Vision, which I like. The sequel, released 10 years ago, showcased the ingenuity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well as its initial growing pains. It's good to be back, Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. says, after landing his Iron Man suit in the middle of a Stark Expo stage, surrounded by cheerleaders and pyrotechnics. The opening ceremony for the Stark Expo is an impressive spectacle featuring celebrity cameos, Olivia Munn, Stan Lee as Larry King, an ode to the past, a video message from Howard Stark, John Slattery doing his best Walt Disney, and the threat of the future. Stark is secretly dying from exposure to his arc reactor. To suggest there's a lot going on would be something of an understatement. That sentiment can be applied to all of Iron Man 2, which takes the theatricality of Stark's grand entrance to heart, with all of the zeal of a man chasing his last hurrah. In the sequel, which opened 10 years ago on May 7th, 2010, my God, Iron Man 2, 10 years ago today. Director Jon Favreau doubles down on all the elements introduced in the opening minutes throughout the rest of the film. The result is an overcrowded sequel that feels like an after-party, a flashy, sequined, champagne-soaked celebration that showcases both the ingenuity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its initial growing pains. With 23 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, and nearly a dozen more in development, it's strange to think about a time when there was only 2. Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. That was only a decade ago, although it's now difficult not to consider the MCU within the context of it being the biggest franchise in the world, a coalition of filmmakers and stars and a grand story arc stretching from the Infinity Saga to beyond. The state of the cinematic universe was very different at the time of Iron Man 2's release. Iron Man not only launched Marvel Studios, but propelled the careers of Favreau, Downey, and producer Kevin Feige to new heights. It's funny now, in the age of billion-dollar box office expectations, thanks in no small part to the Avengers, to look back at the $585.3 million Iron Man grossed on a $140 million budget. But what's more fascinating is the fact that the Incredible Hulk only grossed $264.8 million on a $150 million budget. Yes, Marvel Studios had ambitious plans and a stable of comic book characters, but in terms of box office heavy hitters, all it really had was Iron Man. Marvel Studios' mantra at the time couldn't have been too far off from what Stark says in Avengers Endgame. My priority is to bring back what we lost? I hope so, yes. Keep what I found? I have to, at all costs. Iron Man 2, also notable for being the first Marvel Studios film to release under Disney, was always going to be a film made under the pressure of trying to retain the magic of what made the first film a success for the burgeoning studio. While Iron Man 2, penned by Justin Theroux, who'd helped cement Downey Jr.'s second coming as the screenwriter for Tropic Thunder, lacked the narrative focus and urgency of the first film, it delivered on big personalities and a specific rhythm found in the dialogue. This dialogue, which frequently plays fast and loose with word associations, hinges on callbacks and uses double entendres in such a way that would make Mickey Mouse blush, which not only supported the improvisation of Downey, but also those of Don Cheadle's Rhodey and Sam Rockwell's Justin Hammer, who is arguably the film's MVP outside of Downey. And then there was the wild card Mickey Rourke, hot off his The Wrestler Best Actor nomination, who infamously came to Favreau and Thoreau with a list of ideas for his character, Anton Vanko, including the bird, and later bristled at studio execs when, to his testament, most of his work ended up on the cutting room floor. In hindsight, it seems there were simply too many voices and ideas involved in Iron Man 2, all being catered to by a director and a screenwriter who wanted to please everyone. Yet, this crowded process also allowed for each actor to imbue their character with strong and memorable personalities to give supporting players the voices of leads, something that would aid the MCU as it continued. Thoreau spoke about his experiences at Iron Man 2 in 2017, saying, "After the first Iron Man, the expectations for the second one were huge. We tried to please the fans and tried to make it really big, but sometimes these things, they just don't quite work. But there are parts of the movie that I'm very proud of. Good for you, man. Good for you. Never not be proud of your work." While Iron Man only had to contend with the brashness of Downey's Tony Stark and a delightful scenery-chewing performance by Jeff Bridges as the villain Obadiah Stane, Iron Man 2 was jam-packed with actors who could all steal the scene and one-up each other in playful competition. Even the supporting players, Favreau, Gwyneth Paltrow, Scarlett Johansson, Gary Shandling, and Samuel L. Jackson, were edging in on the spotlight and creating something that felt more like a Monty Python-esque collaboration than a solo film defined by a singular voice. Much of the same elements that made Tropic Thunder so great are present in Iron Man 2, but where getting carried away with situational humor works great for a comedy movie, it doesn't always work in the service of a film trying to juggle the seriousness of its lead character's confrontation with mortality, legacy, and weapons manufacturing. But what a juggling act it is, and even with a few balls being dropped and rolling under the table, never to be picked up again, Iron Man 2 is never anything less than immensely entertaining. From the aforementioned performances to the action set pieces like the Grand Prix race and fight, and Iron Man and War Machine's battle against hordes of hammer drones in the middle of falling cherry blossoms, beautifully shot by cinematographer Matthew Labatique, there's a lot to love about Iron Man 2. But much of this love and memory of the film's initially positive reception, 73% on Rotten Tomatoes and an A on CinemaScore, seems to have softened greatly over the years, particularly in light of additional MCU entries. Some of the most common complaints have focused on how we never got an adaptation of the famous Demon in a Bottle comic book storyline that saw Tony Stark dealing with his alcoholism, and the notion that too much of Iron Man 2 feels like an advertisement for future movies. Both of these complaints get to the root of the MCU and how much you're willing to buy into your inner workings of a cinematic universe. While some fans were disappointed in the way Tony Stark's drunken state played for comedy in Iron Man 2, falling far closer to a Todd Phillips old school than Leaving Las Vegas, the Demon in a Bottle storyline isn't entirely absent. Iron Man 2 doesn't entirely follow through with it, but the idea of Stark's addictive personality is cemented here, only it's not alcohol he's addicted to. Tony's addiction is to being Iron Man, unable to think of himself and the armor as separate entities, which he states as the case at the Senate hearing. His willingness to take wild and unnecessary risks and resign himself to death without telling Pepper all speak to a kind of drunken sense of invincibility and self-destruction that comes with his attachment to Iron Man. Shane Black's Iron Man 3 and Russo brothers' Captain America Civil War both took this issue of Tony Stark's addiction to his own technology further, essentially making his suit of armor a bottle for Stark to pour his insecurities into. Iron Man 2 works better in the context with later films, which may be something of a cheat, especially considering that at the time of its release, most superhero sequels such as X2, Spider-Man 2, and The Dark Knight were largely self-contained. But it is the very thing that the MCU and subsequent cinematic universes aim to sell us on, the idea that none of these stories exist in a vacuum, and planned or not, flaws had a means to later become advantages. Along those lines, there's the existence of all the Avengers references in Iron Man 2, from Nick Fury, S.H.I.E.L.D., Black Widow, references to Thor, footage from the Incredible Hulk, Captain America's S.H.I.E.L.D., and a map of global hotspots, including Wakanda. Iron Man 2 is chock full of teasers, for advertisements if you prefer, for future movies. Notably, Marvel has gotten better at including these references, or at least saving them for post- or mid-credit scenes, with nothing so seemingly egregious as two characters referencing the work they had yet to do in New Mexico under the setup, Thor. But even then, these methods for referencing other storylines and characters popping up and disappearing weren't unfamiliar to comic book readers. There's always going to be the argument that films are not comic books and can't work the same way, but for Marvel Studios, they have. No references to Thor, Captain America, Howard Stark being a founding member of S.H.I.E.L.D. were not necessary for Iron Man 2's narrative, but even if ancillary elements like Nick Fury's presence and the introduction of Black Widow could have been handled better, those characters were key parts of Iron Man's publication history and aren't entirely out of left field. It's easy to forget, especially now, that Marvel Studios sprinted to the Avengers with 5 films in 4 years. So while the obvious answer now is the overcrowding issues of Iron Man 2 is to suggest that Nick Fury and Black Widow solo movies should have been part of the Phase 1, those weren't financially viable options. Marvel Studios had yet to bet the future of the Avengers and its cinematic universe on the character who would draw the biggest audience, Iron Man. Iron Man 2 had to carry the weight of a cinematic universe and not only serve as a sequel to a critically acclaimed hit, but also work in the building blocks that would entice audiences for what was coming down the pipeline. The first Marvel Studios event film that would be the means to measure the success of the MCU, Iron Man 2 is messy, often endearingly so, and it's far from being the best film in the MCU, yet it was an essential piece in making the MCU the titan that it is today, and shifting perceptions on what a sequel within the confines of a cinematic universe meant, for better or worse. 10 years later, and it's become all too easy to loosen the screws on Iron Man 2, but when it comes to looking at the 20 films that followed, Favreau's sequel, as both a learning lesson and success story, may be the essential component, that missing element in the arc reactor that powers the whole mighty Marvel machine. I like that article. I really think I was always a fan of Iron Man 2 for all the reasons people criticize it for. I'm like, I still like it. It is wildly entertaining. It's still a great comic book movie. Yes, it's overstuffed, but I liked all the character work. I liked a lot of what was going on in there. So while it's certainly not a perfect movie, it really was, I think, the very beginnings of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We really felt that there was something there, and to see where 10 years later, we're 10 years away from Iron Man 2, which is incredible. I mean, when I think about it, that's a substantial part of my life ago, really, and probably yours too. So I found that very interesting, and made me want to go back and maybe throw in the old Iron Man 2 4K and take a gander at it. I always like, whenever I watch it, I'm thinking, I like this movie. So anyway, I thought I saw that dropped in the Hollywood Reporter today, and I figured I would share that with you before getting into the topic at hand. But before we do that, I want to remind all of you that we are giving away on this channel. We are giving away an almost $1,000 JBL Bar 9.1 soundbar with Dolby Atmos. It has 10 channels, including your low frequency subwoofer, and it doesn't hit the public. You can't buy it yet until May 31st. And we are going to be giving this away a week from tomorrow on my birthday. That's right, May 15th is my birthday. And if you want to enter for the drawing, no purchase is necessary. You can go down in the description of this chat, follow the link, and you're going to be entered. And if you want to go and like and subscribe, or go to the Whining About Movies Facebook page, or the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, you can, but you don't have to. Anyway, it's just a cool thing. And once again, I have to thank Connie at Harman International, which is a subsidiary of Samsung, and they oversee JBL. Connie from the Harman International Experiential Engagement Department has made this possible. So many thanks to them for allowing us to do this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, interesting news today. Look, I've been fascinated with CBS All Access since they started it. It was always the talk all the way back into the 1970s that they always wanted to use Star Trek to launch. The original Star Trek Phase 2 series was going to be used to launch a Paramount network. That obviously didn't happen. The Star Trek Phase 2 series was scrapped, and they turned it into Star Trek The Motion Picture. Famously, of course, the 13 scripts that they did have commissioned, 2 of them wound up on Next Generation. The second season opener, The Child, and a 4th season episode called Devil's Due. Well, obviously, Voyager then went on to become the the crown of the then launched, the 1995 launched UPN, the United Paramount Network. And Voyager, they finally did that. They launched Paramount Network with the Star Trek show. Then when they started CBS All Access a couple years back, Star Trek Discovery was their premier show. So once again, Star Trek was used to launch CBS All Access. Well, now it's 3 years later. They haven't announced CBS All Accesses. We don't know anything about their ratings, really, or, we know how many people are subscribing. I don't think it's been a resounding success. They really haven't had a lot of new stuff on there, and I think that the programming... Look, I wasn't going to make this a let's bash on Star Trek, but as anyone who knows me knows, or anybody who's watched this channel for a long time, I have found their Star Trek efforts lacking. I also was very, very, very disappointed in the Twilight Zone, the Jordan Peele-produced Twilight Zone. Ooh, boy, was I disappointed. As many people know, in addition to Star Trek, the Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone, is one of my favorite things ever, and I have great affection. I think the actual mid-'80s Phil DeGuerre produced and then J. Michael Straczynski produced mid-'80s Twilight Zone has a lot of really great stuff in it. I'm not saying it's as excellent as the original Twilight Zone, but still, the mid-'80s version had a lot of really great stuff, great directors. I mean, watch the 20-minute, go on to YouTube and look up Nightcrawlers, Twilight Zone. William Friedkin, the man who directed The Exorcist, directed, I'll tell you, bang up 20 minutes. There's some really great stuff. Her Pilgrim Soul, A Message from Charity. There's some great stuff. I really did like the mid-'80s revival of Twilight Zone. This one, not so much. Star Trek and the Twilight Zone live and die by one thing, and that is writing. Writing. And unfortunately, I have not been a fan. But that's not to say things like The Good Fight aren't good. But we all know in the world of the streaming wars, there's been talk on other channels on YouTube that I like, channels that Netflix might buy Star Trek or Viacom. Is there money with Sherry Redstone putting Viacom back together with CBS? What is going on? Well, ladies and gentlemen, something huge as far as CBS All Access is concerned, and something massive in terms of where Star Trek is, the future of Star Trek, happened today. I'm going to throw on my glasses to read this one because this dropped on Deadline this morning at 7:30. And this is big news for the history of CBS and the Star Trek franchise. CBS All Access to get a summer reboot, adding new films and shows ahead of global expansion. So look, I'd just like to point out that any talk about this demise of CBS and Paramount or their streaming services seem a little premature. CBS All Access will get a significant reboot this summer, Viacom CBS CEO Bob Bakish told Wall Street analysts Thursday, with Paramount films and shows from Nickelodeon, BET, and other networks joining the service. The subscription offering will be rebranded, meaning I don't think it's going to be called CBS All Access anymore, and will also expand internationally in the next 12 months, Bakish said. Our biggest franchises, i.e., what do you think their biggest franchise is, will be the key to this strategy, Bakish said on the company's quarterly earnings call. The effort will leverage an already developed tech platform we're not building from scratch, which is a little disappointing because CBS All Access was never a very good platform. More than 100 library films from Paramount were added to All Access Thursday, today, the company said after the earnings call. Titles include some installments in the Star Trek franchise: The Godfather, Terms of Endearment, and An Inconvenient Truth. Expanding CBS All Access's library of films with these iconic titles from Paramount Pictures is just one of the many ways we're integrating the phenomenal catalog of IP available to us within the Viacom CBS family, All Access Programming Chief Julie McNamara said in a press release issued after the earnings call. The service is on a growth trajectory with 2 record-breaking months in March and April, and we look forward to bringing even more premium content and value to our subscribers in the coming months. Other networks in the portfolio whose offerings will join All Access include Smithsonian and the Paramount Network, BET last September launched its own subscription streaming entrant, BET Plus, which costs $10 a month and includes series, movies, and specials from BET networks and creators like Tyler Perry, Tracy Oliver, and Will Packer. I would imagine that is all going to be sucked up by CBS All Access, because they say they're doing that. While there are still plenty of questions about the road ahead for All Access, including its name, financial profile, pricing, and exact programming lineup, Backish commentary was a step forward from the last earnings call. Speaking to investors in February, Backish teased a streaming house of brands that would take advantage of the full portfolio of Viacom CBS, but many analysts were caught up short by the lack of specifics. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only intensified the sense of urgency traditional companies have about boosting their own streaming outlets. In recent months, Disney, NBC Universal, and Warner Media have also mounted significant streaming efforts as media companies look to close the gap with Netflix and other incumbents. Original programming will continue to mine the company's IP, following the line of breakout shows like The Good Fight and Star Trek Picard. CFO Christine Spade said All Access and Showtime, the company's two biggest subscription streaming offerings, remain on track for 16 million subscribers by the end of 2020. That figure is in line with previous internal targets. CBS, prior to its merger with Viacom, generally did not break out the specific split between All Access and Showtime, but in recent years, they had been fairly evenly split. The two biggest months in terms of customer acquisition have come during the first half of 2020, the company said, because of Star Trek Picard, which they don't have anymore. It's already aired. As of March 31st, All Access and Showtime together had 13.5 million subscribers, up 50% from the same quarter a year ago. Streaming revenue in the quarter also rose 50% to $471 million. CBS All Access currently costs $6 a month for basic ad-supported offering and $10 a month for an ad-free version. Backish didn't offer a firm projection when asked by one analyst if a holdback effort comparable with NBC Universal's reclaiming of The Office or Disney's withdrawal from Netflix could be in the offing. Viacom CBS has taken some knocks for licensing to third parties. South Park went to HBO Max, and Nickelodeon forged an output deal with Netflix rather than keeping content in-house. Backish earlier in the call noted the sale of Paramount comedy The Lovebirds to Netflix. Unlike many other SVOD platforms, All Access will also be able to continue delivering live and on-demand news and sports programming via 200 CBS affiliates. Backish described a critical mass of live sports, calling out exclusive streaming rights to the National Women's Soccer League and the UEFA Champions League Soccer. CBS telecasts of NFL games, NCAA basketball, and golf have long been a hallmark of CBS All Access, which launched in 2015. Distribution deals are a key element in gaining scale in streaming. All Access was added Thursday to Comcast's Infinity platforms, which will introduce it to a majority of the households served by the number one U.S. cable operator. Very, very interesting. Now, Midnight's Edge dropped a story today. Andre did an editorial about whether or not Netflix was going to buy Star Trek or buy CBS All Access or Viacom or all of it. This would seem to contradict that, although maybe not. Obviously, I do not have any great insight into this. I'm only reading the Deadline article. But obviously, we are watching a great consolidation of the media companies in what I feel was inevitable. We have NBC Universal doing the Peacock. We've got Warner Brothers doing HBO Max. We have Disney Plus happening. Now we have this. It's been interesting because Paramount made obviously a deal for things like Coming to America and Beverly Hills Cop 4 with, in fact, Netflix. It looked to me like if Netflix had acquired Paramount, they would have Paramount's library. They would own Star Trek. They would have Showtime. And it might have been a good move for them. So who's to say? Maybe that could eventually happen. I don't know. But right now, what CBS and Viacom are doing are exactly what NBC Universal is doing, what Warner Brothers is doing with HBO Max, and what Disney is doing. They're consolidating everything they have under one umbrella. I would imagine that Showtime and CBS All Access will also merge. It doesn't make sense that they have all of these networks and they're not going to put them under one umbrella like HBO Max. So what does this mean for Star Trek? Well, you know, you've got Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery Season 3. There's been no official renewal of Star Trek Discovery Season 4. I don't know. I mean, going into the future, I guess they could leave it anywhere. They don't have an air date yet for Star Trek Discovery. Apparently, it was entirely shot. Season 3 was entirely finished with its live-action portion. So that means that it could absolutely be in the middle of post-production right now, which is great. I mean, for me at least, and obviously this time in quarantine. I mean, I've got a whole lot of stuff that I've been doing. By the way, for those interested, today on the Burnettwork, I dropped my 2-hour interview with Orville executive producer David A. Goodman. David Goodman is a right-hand man of Seth MacFarlane's. They worked on American Dad and Family Guy. They've been working together for a long time. Goodman was instrumental when he was over working on Star Trek Enterprise to bring Seth MacFarlane over to actually play a character on the show. David is currently, not only is he the executive producer of the Orville, but he is also the current president of the Writers Guild of America. I did a 2-hour interview with him that's really interesting about how he crazily got involved in the entertainment business, which is not something that he was necessarily going to do, and how he found his way onto his first writing gig, which was The Golden Girls, believe it or not. And it's a fascinating 2-hour conversation. I want to thank David Goodman. I mean, it's not... to be able to get the president of the Writers Guild of America and the current executive producer of the Orville to talk to me. The man's a mensch. I met him. He's written 3 Star Trek books that are definitely worth getting. The wonderful Star Trek Federation, the first 150 years, not to be confused with Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens' Star Trek book Federation, which is a novel, but his book Federation, the first 150 years, is like a history of the Federation reference book. It's great. It's great. And then he also wrote the autobiography of James T. Kirk and the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard. So in addition to working in television, he's an amazing producer and a really, really nice guy. And I want to thank him for doing that. I had a great time doing the interviews. And after the 400th episode of Robservations, it's been nice to have the kind of response I've been getting. So I would say he's the third person I've interviewed that has ties to Star Trek and the Orville, along with Melinda Snodgrass and, of course, Brian Fuller. And sort of interesting. So check that out if you're interested. It is currently on the Burnettwork. So after you are on this call, you can go see that. And, you know, I think there's no greater vote of confidence for our little channel here and our little Post-Geek Singularity community than by getting industry professionals who they think enough of me and the channel and you guys that they're willing to come on and be interviewed. And, I mean, these are deep dive interviews. And as many of you have heard me say, I kind of wanted to do a Joe Rogan-esque thing. I mean, I don't have a studio yet that I can bring people into. That's a little further down the line. But it's still great that I'm going to get these interviews, and I'll continue. I'll endeavor to bring more. Anybody you want me to go after, I'm happy to listen. But anyway, so the CBS All Access thing, and whatever they're doing, a lot of goings on. Look, businesses are in free fall. Stocks are, who knows where we're at right now. But I tend to think I'm pretty optimistic, even though the unemployment numbers are staggering. The amount of people that are out of work are staggering. I think we're going to come back. Look, the COVID-19 problem is not going to go away. And we're going to see there is going to be a new normal. But I think in terms of our economy and things that are happening, I do see, I'm pretty optimistic about everybody being able to jump back into things. We're just going to live in a little different world. I mean, maybe a more aware world, maybe a safer world. And that can only be a good thing. We're going to be far more aware of one another, hopefully, than we've been in a long time. So I choose to look at the benefits of what has happened rather than dwell on... I mean, basically right now, America is a wrecked ship on an island. But maybe it's the island in Lost. Who knows what's going to happen to you now? But hopefully we will be seafaring again soon. But anyway, it's pretty interesting. So what do I think is going to happen? look, making Star Trek shows is very expensive. It makes sense to me that they would roll into, say, a Star Trek Pike show, whatever it's going to be called, I don't know. But what they would do is just redress the sets from Discovery. They've already got all of that stuff. And look, as god-awful as I think all the design work on modern Star Trek has been, the fact that none of it's canonical and all that, regardless, if they're going to make a Pike show, which they might, my personal feelings are maybe it'll be the best of the modern Star Trek shows, and they'll get some really great writers who really understand what Star Trek's all about. At least I would hope so. I kind of felt that way about when Marvel Comics took over, or pardon me, when Marvel Comics took over the Star Trek comic franchise from DC in the mid-90s. The comic I liked the most was their Captain Pike comic. It didn't run very long, but it was a pretty good comic. So what I'm thinking is that, if they continue on with Star Trek shows, that's obviously an attraction. They're going to have to step up their game. One of the problems with CBS All Access is the same problem that they have over at Apple Plus. There's just not a lot of new content on these streaming services, and Netflix has kind of set the tone. One of the things I really want to know about that's kind of disappeared under the radar is poor Josh Boone, director of New Mutants, was making The Stand for CBS All Access. Where is that? Where's The Stand miniseries? As many people know, The Stand is one of my favorite books in all the world, and I really want to know what's going on with that. And they've turned it into a miniseries with an amazing cast, and I'm hoping, we'll see it shortly. But I've heard nothing about it. I don't know where it is in production. It's strange. So we shall see. I think this is actually a good move for CBS All Access and Paramount. I'd like to see a lot of Paramount titles. One of the benefits of this is that they go into their deep catalog and they start doing new 4K transfers of older movies. Obviously, yesterday, Studio Canal dropped the trailer for their 4K restoration of Flash Gordon. Everyone knows how I love my physical media, and Studio Canal is in the middle of, I talked to somebody yesterday, I can't say who I talked to, but I talked to somebody who's working on a few of those titles, creating special features. They're working on both the Total Recall and the Basic Instinct discs, so that's pretty interesting. They put out, obviously, Elephant Man, they got Flash Gordon coming out, they're doing Total Recall, and they're doing Basic Instinct, the two Verhoeven films. Very excited about that. But one of the great things about what this is going to allow, hopefully, what CBS and Paramount will do, Paramount is now, finally, they're putting out new Blu-ray versions of movies, 4K versions, restorations of things like Fatal Attraction. And I think they're doing Flashdance, Top Gun. Obviously, they're re-releasing Top Gun. And so they're delving into their deep catalog, which they haven't done. And Paramount, for a while, was a terrific home video company. I mean, Paramount Home Video was putting out some amazing versions of movies. I mean, they did a restoration of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, but they never released the 4K disc. They released the file in 4K. So what I'm hoping is that with CBS and Viacom together again, and they're announcing this new venture, and hopefully they'll put Showtime and all of their sports and Nickelodeon, they'll bring it all home, all under one roof, because that's what people want. And it makes sense. And then what you've gone is rather than having... It's really interesting that you're seeing a merging of television networks and motion picture studios. And it's kind of like we're sort of reverting back to the way it was when I was a kid. You had ABC, CBS, and NBC. Now we're going to have basically Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, Paramount. It'll be interesting to see where Sony is all at in all this. But, yeah, it'll be interesting. So it's kind of, in a way, there's sort of a contraction happening, but interesting. You're just bringing everything under one roof, and I think in a way it's smart. If you only had to pay for 6 networks or something rather than cable, and each network was $10 a month or something competitive, and of course Netflix is also their own thing, but that's not so bad. $40-50 a month. It's different than what we were paying for cable. And as long as they're restoring all of these movies and shows and putting out all their back catalog and just putting it all out there, it's kind of neat. I don't know. I tend to look at it as something that's favorable. I see it as being a favorable thing. Call me crazy. And as far as Star Trek is concerned, they were calling it the Star Trek universe back at the San Diego Comic-Con last year. Eventually, maybe we will get things out of this, like we'll see Deep Space Nine and Voyager restored into HD, even 4K, probably 2K, but 4K. That would be fantastic if that's a byproduct of this. Now, remember, if they did that, it still took 4 years to up-res, to go back. They basically, for the Star Trek The Next Generation Blu-rays, they basically took Star Trek The Next Generation all the way through post-production again. That's essentially what they did. They didn't have to re-edit it. They used the old edits, but they put it together and took it through post, and it took 4 years. It was 178 episodes. It took 4 years. And so you're looking at 4 years of Voyager and 4 years of Deep Space Nine. I would just expand the team and double up your effects artists and composite artists and do it in 4 years and start putting them out and put that as part of your platform. I mean, even if you're spending $20 million a series, you're getting 170 some odd episodes of both Voyager and Deep Space Nine. I mean, why not? Let's hope that's a great byproduct of what we're seeing. And of course, hope springs eternal. Let's hope we get great Star Trek. I don't know if we will, but I hope we will. So big news, big doings today with CBS. Maybe though, hey, is this a desperate gambit to save their asses? I don't know. I really don't know, but we shall see. I have letters, ladies and gentlemen. I have letters. I'm going to jump into letters before I jump into your chats and things. Let's see what we have from you today, you imagination connoisseurs. Lior Hader, or Hadar, Lior, like Dior, Lior. Hey, Rob, I just finished listening to your... I just finished listening to your Gladiator show. Since I do share your affection for Ridley Scott's epic, I wanted to add some... Wow, sorry, man. Sorry about that. All right. Just finished listening to your Gladiator show. Since I do share your affection for Ridley Scott's epic, I wanted to add some insights in order to, let's say, round up the package. Gladiator belongs to a long line of Roman epics, tracing their origin to literally the beginning of cinema. I don't hear this mentioned often, but Gladiator is an unofficial remake of Anthony Mann's excellent 1964 film, The Fall of the Roman Empire, where Alec Guinness plays Marcus Aurelius, Christopher Plummer as Commodus, Sophia Loren as Lucilla, and Russell Crowe character called Livius here is played by Stephen Boyd, fresh off another epic, Ben-Hur. It's a wonderful film that is somewhat forgotten nowadays, overshadowed by its more famous cousin, but I highly recommend it. In Gladiator, Scott depicts the gladiatorial games as ferocious and bloody, not sugarcoating anything. These sequences are some of the best pieces of filmmaking Scott has ever made in their kinetic energy and brilliant editing. Almost 70 years before that, though, another movie became famous for depicting Roman games. Cecil B. DeMille's 1932 Sign of the Cross. Being pre-code, DeMille was free of censorship and depicted the games as vicious and depraved as they were. It has to be seen to be believed. When you watch Gladiator, you are thrilled by Maximus's courage and confidence in the arena, and his line, "Are you not entertained?" is a classic, and deservedly so. But when you watch Sign of the Cross, DeMille makes sure you will feel sickened by what Rome has become. There is no way a modern mainstream blockbuster will do what Paramount allowed DeMille to do in 1932. Have you seen either The Fall of the Roman Empire or Sign of the Cross? Thanks for reading. Lior, pronounced Lior. He says pronounced Lior. I have seen The Fall of the Roman Empire, and you are correct about that. I have not seen Sign of the Cross, but you just made it go to the top of my pile. I have to get it. I hope it's available on physical media, because if it's not, I'm going to be a sad boy. A very, very sad boy. This one comes from Enterprise H. Again, 1701 H. Truth of Transporters. Greetings. It is I, the Implorer of Implications, flagship of the Federation and your existential enterprise. First, do you have an opinion to share on the game Star Trek Generations? If not, that's fine. You keep asking me about that. I have not. I've not played it. Secondly, I would agree with your sentiment that transporters fling our atoms through subspace. Why? Because if they didn't, then we'd need material from the spot where we'd want to send people or objects in order to reassemble them. On a planet, sure. But we also see people beaming aboard enemy spacecraft. Where does the matter come from over there? The law of equivalent exchange from Full Metal Alchemist. By that logic, we could just replicate bombs aboard spacecraft without the need to replicate them first before beaming them in. Going one step further, why bombs? Why not just replicate antimatter? I guess we no longer have to haul these torpedoes around. Good writers know better than to open themselves up to this mess. But Enterprise H, I hear your commentators cry out. What about what happened to Riker or Kirk? The pattern was copied and bounced back? Now, feel free to challenge me on this, but if there was no matter there, how would Thomas Riker even exist? Given that he was returning, wouldn't the alternative be that he'd draw biomass from the ship's storage upon the pattern's reception? It sounds a lot like energy cloning or replication. I know that it is murkier than this, but I do think that McCoy's explanation for the transporter is the most logical from a writing standpoint. I have seen the video from Because Science on what, if we take it literally, converting a person into energy would do. Then again, TNG's Second Chances seems to provide a solution with its containment beam, which might just be the confinement beam, and the writers got the name wrong. People have said that you don't need to know how things work, particularly in regards to the Star Wars prequels introducing midi-chlorians, but even if I were to play Krognick's advocate, to me, that only works in terms of audiences. Writers do not have this luxury, especially on an ongoing show like Star Trek, where you had guest writers who may have different interpretations of something. The showrunners and writers must understand what keeps the Enterprise from breaking and the implications of their writing. Enterprise H, NCC 1701H. Well, Enterprise H, again, I think it's really interesting. As you all know, I mean, I love my canon. I love when there's explanations for the tech. You have to tech the tech. I mean, I love all that. And the more realistic it becomes, I find it the more... look, I've said on the show, I think one of the things I really didn't like about the J.J. Abrams era of Star Trek is how they broke the transporter. When they had Khan in Star Trek Into Darkness transport from the cockpit of his one-man fighter that he attacks Starfleet headquarters with, he transports from there to the Klingon homeworld. Or in Star Trek, the first Star Trek '09, when they beam from Delta Vega onto the Enterprise, a ship at warp, that's magic. I mean, one of the interesting things about transporter technology, as we've seen it, ship-to-ship beaming was risky. Line-of-sight beaming from the ship down to the planet was good. Remember, the transporter was designed so they didn't have to fly characters from the ship down to a planet every time they wanted to go there. It was an elegant production solution, and it had the line-of-sight beaming issue was great. But once you turn it into a magical transporter system that allows you to beam all over the galaxy, which, by the way, is ridiculous that you could lock on to something that far away. I mean, the kinds of distances that you're traveling, the kind of power you would need, it's just absurd, just silly. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most egregious things that they did in the J.J. Abrams era of Star Trek was to wreck the transporter entirely. They just conjure up magical tech because they're lazy, bad writers. But, that's just me. So, yeah, that's, I mean, you know me. Anyway, there's some people here. Let's jump in and see what you people have to say today. Let's see. Willow sends in a tip, and thank you for your daily tip, Willow. Inglourious Bastards seem to have some commentary on King Kong. Black American comparisons during the card game scene in the tavern. Hellstrom, am I the story of the Negro in America? Table, no. Hellstrom, well then, I must be King Kong. No, absolutely. I mean, that has been an ongoing debate. I heard it in film school a lot. Is King Kong really a movie about Black Americans' struggle against the system? I don't know. I don't know. I perhaps you could look at it that way. I never really have, but it could be. But Tarantino is definitely commenting on that whole thing there. Absolutely. Jordy Lyon sends in a super chat and says, I often get our own moderator. I often get asked the interesting question, what exactly does Dolby do, and what do they actually sell to the cinema theaters and consumers? Well, Dolby basically came up with different kinds, first of all, different kinds of stereo sound and ways to process that stereo sound. That is, they own it. So it's proprietary to them. And they came up with Dolby Digital. I think the first, if memory serves, the first Dolby Digital film in the theaters for wide release was Batman Returns, but there were some places that played. I know that Star Trek 6 had Dolby Digital, and then the Dolby Digital, it's a lossy sound. It's lossy. It's not uncompressed, but it was still like AC3, Dolby AC3, and things like that. Were used on laser discs, so it's a proprietary sound system, and they've made it better as they've gone along. So, for instance, Dolby Atmos, in addition to being surround sound, it added ceiling speakers and even speakers on the floor if they wanted. So Dolby stereo sound is one thing. Now they have also Dolby Vision, where Dolby teamed up with Christie projectors, and they created a dual laser projection system that increased the brightness and basically the color accuracy. And also, unfortunately, we don't see this much anymore, but for 3D movies, Dolby Vision added brightness levels, and they actually had, it was like 2 dedicated channels. So the 3D was really, really crisp, and it worked really, really well. If their source, it worked as good as their source material. So when you go to a Dolby cinema, you have both Dolby projection and you have Dolby sound, and it's pretty impressive. It's pretty, the picture is razor sharp, the brightness levels are very high, and the sound system is enveloping. So when you go to a Dolby cinema, you're actually getting both sound and projection that is straight out of the Dolby labs. So that's basically what you're getting. So that's what they're selling to theaters and consumers. They're selling both picture and sound, which is exactly what exhibition is all about. Star Wars Rocks sends in a tip and says, something I don't understand about the streaming age infancy is why HBO Max haven't released their timetable for when their service will be rolling out internationally, because as of now, we only know that it's coming out in the US on the 29th. I think that they honestly don't know yet. They're still trying to figure stuff out. Right now, everybody wants to roll out their services as soon as possible to get those subscription dollars rolling in. But yeah, I know it's frustrating for our international friends out there who want to get these services. It's because when they start releasing new shows, we want to know, when are you going to get to see whatever's on HBO Max that you want to see? And it can be frustrating. And also, international markets don't even know if they're going to be getting this. So it really could actually be a DC streaming service situation all over again. Look, I feel your pain. I think it's really frustrating when we don't have the streaming services being up front. Look, this is all happening so fast. And I am no corporate shill. I do love entertainment, however. I like the entertainment that our corporate overlords are making for us, and that's what I like to cover. But I agree with you. I don't feel that they're doing a good job. We're living in a global world now, so why not tell people? Obviously, I just think they don't know the answer yet. It's going so fast. It's going so fast that I don't know. I'm sure we'll find out, because that question's going to be asked. And of course, they want world domination, so it's not like they've forgotten you. Mukbang sends in a super chat. It says, thanks for the Iron Man 2 stuff, but what did you make of Ted 2? The sentient bear fights for his rights. I have to tell you something. This is going to seem a little weird from the Viceroy of Verisimilitude. I loved Ted 1, the first Ted. I loved it. I hated Ted 2. I hated it. I thought that Ted 1, for what it was, I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was hilarious. Ted 2, I didn't see it in the theater. I didn't see Ted 2 in the theater, and I bought the Blu-ray. Sight unseen. I figured how bad. I mean, it must be good, right? I didn't like anything about it. Nothing within the confines of Ted. When you buy into it, suddenly if you buy the film's central conceit that Ted exists, I could believe, like comedy like Ghostbusters, within the confines, within the proscenium of the frame of that movie, the stage that is set for Ted, like the stage that is set for Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters, I bought into it. I'm like, all right, dope, I'm into it. Ted 2, I didn't believe at all. The first Ted was sort of, you bought in to Ted, but trying to believe in all the shenanigans that were going on in Ted 2, I just didn't believe any of it. And it really bothered me. I think it's a case study, considering the creative team on it and all that. It's a case study in why look, and this is not to take away from Ted 2 for the people that like it, but for me personally, if I was teaching a college course after I got finished comparing and contrasting Star Wars with Force Awakens, I would compare and contrast the differences between Ted 1 and Ted 2, and why, how believability and how a fantastical premise can work in one film and not work in another. Even though I love the idea, the central conceit of Ted, like you said, fighting for his rights, is a really interesting one. And by the way, Seth MacFarlane totally took that from Measure of a Man. That's totally where he got that idea. We all know it. And I was really disappointed in Ted 2. I wanted to love it because I loved Ted 1. Bob Koala is here, and he sends in a tip, says maybe some homework for the Post-Geek Singularity, some words to honor our mothers and how they impacted their little connoisseurs. Well, Bob is correct. Mother's Day is this Sunday. You know what? I think I'll have to have my mom on the show this Sunday and talk to Nancy. I can't begin to try and get her to get Skype to work, but actually maybe I could get her to get Skype to work. Maybe I can have her do a pre-recorded message from her. But I think you're right. I think that's great. Some words to honor our mothers. Why don't you guys and gals and gentle beings and people from across the 28 known galaxies, why don't you write me a letter in the next couple days, letters that I can get and read them on Sunday's show. That would be a great thing. I think that's a great idea, Bob. Mukbang sends in another super chat and says, is the 2017 Twin Peaks any good? I like the old one and the movie. I was a big Twin Peaks fan. I really loved Fire Walk with Me. Is the 2017 version any good? There are parts of it that I think are genius. I don't know if it all holds together, and I think that it's maybe the most David Lynch thing he's ever made. Some of it I really liked. Some of it I found insufferable. A lot of it was intriguing. I'll tell you one thing. It's definitely worth a watch. But it's certainly, I don't know what realm it exists in, but it's pretty crazy. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, one of three. What's up again, Rob? I want to comment on your show from 3 days ago about the need for more Star Wars. I don't want to kill anyone's excitement, but I'm concerned about the prospect of more Star Wars movies after we just had 5 over 4 years. Also, while I understand the excitement about Taika Waititi directing, how many times have people gone wild over a great director directing a big franchise film just to end up seeing the movie and leaving the theater thinking the film was diaper rash? Rob, I don't want to kill anyone's buzz or kill people's buzz. I just don't want this movie to come out and see a bunch of headlines about unhinged fans and people sending out death threats again when this movie comes out. Nick, I'm with you, man. I'm over my own bitching about Star Trek, and I'm certainly over everybody else's bitching about Star Wars. I don't know if you guys watched Jeremy Johns. Jeremy Johns did a really fun thing for May the 4th Be With You. He did a review of Duel of the Fates as if it was a real movie. I thought that was pretty clever. But yeah, I'm tired of not liking Star Wars. I'm tired of getting movies that I feel are. What's interesting is movies always came from bigger corporations. The studios, sometimes they were unto themselves, sometimes they were owned by bigger concerns. But I feel the difference with Disney is that they have, because they're exploiting a property across so many different platforms, that they have to bake all of that in. They have to make movies that are the most family friendly they can be. As I've talked about on the show so often, is that whether you like them or not, Star Wars was really the brainchild of George Lucas, and whether you like the prequels or whatever, even the Clone Wars, it all sprung forth out of his imagination. And the problem now is that the first concern of Star Wars is not the imaginations of the creators, but the corporate interests that Star Wars is supposed to serve. It is an economic engine that is driving everything else in the Disney organization. And I would say that is the wrong way to tell stories. You can never... What you have to do is I think you have to hire really creative people, and you tell them, here's what we need. But the problem is the corporations, what they need does not lend itself well to storytelling, because what they want is something that immediately appeals to everybody. But the problem is great stories. What's interesting is great stories have to live unto themselves. And I think the great stories by definition already appeal to everyone. If you tell great stories that are true to themselves, then they become successful. Then they become things that everybody loves. And if you're declaring or deciding or telling people what the stories are supposed to be before they're being told, then the story is compromised from the get-go, and it'll never be good. It'll never be good. So I don't know what the difference is, but I feel you, Nick. I don't know the answer. I really don't. Mukbang sends in a super chat and says, I love your show, Elizaviews. Still, our favorite was Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. How do you come up with the entries? Well, to be honest, it's kind of flying by the seat of my pants. It's looking through my film collection and what strikes me at the time. And also, I also want to show movies that I think Elizabeth will like, but also have things to talk about, have things to say about them. I mean, there are movies that I wouldn't show her because they just wouldn't be her thing. But I try and show her things that she'll like and that will make for a good show. Mr. Derringer sent in a super chat and says, Hi, Rob. For my first super chat, I'd like to ask you how you'd feel about a ROM Space Knight film and how you would make it good for today. Ooh, Mr. Derringer, I'm a huge ROM fan. I have an entire run of ROM Space Knight. The problem with a ROM film now is a lot of what they did in the comic book, like with the dire wraiths and all that, they couldn't even use. But Gladiator, I think the idea of a ROM Space Knight movie could be very, very cool. I think ROM could be great. ROM is a cross between kind of the Silver Surfer and Green Lantern, sort of. And the whole mythology behind the Space Knights is really, really cool. And they even did Space Knights comics because they couldn't use ROM, but they could use the Space Knights. So I think a ROM, now that we see Hasbro has bought E1, so maybe we'll see something like that happen. I don't know. I know there's crazy rights issues, but look, you just make it kick ass. There's so many things that you can draw from today. There's so many great fantasy and literary properties and science fiction properties that you could draw from. But I think that the first thing you have to do, as you have to do with any one of these properties, you have to take it seriously. You can't say that ROM's based on a toy, so that somehow limits you in what you can do. No. It doesn't matter where your IP came from. You just got to make it good. You have to write a story that appeals to people. You have to write a kick-ass. We live in a world that's post-Expanse, that's post-Star Trek, that's post-Star Wars, that has a lot of great science fiction on TV. I mean, lately, whether it's Tales from the Loop, whether it's Watchmen, whether it's The Boys, whether it's The Umbrella Academy, there's some really sophisticated, intelligent stuff, and a ROM Space Knight movie has to be that way. Now, that doesn't mean it can't kick ass and give you all the sci-fi thrills that you want, but I think that's what we need to have people that really take it seriously. I mean, that's how I would do a ROM movie. I would hire great screenwriters. I mean, I would hire somebody like a Steve Zalian to come up with a story with you. I mean, look at Denis Villeneuve, Eric Roth, and Eric Roth and John Spates wrote the script for Dune. I mean, those are some guys. I'd get all three of those guys to come back. Well, Denis Villeneuve probably wouldn't, but I mean, can you imagine if he did direct Rom Space Knight? That could kick ass. That's what I want to see. I want to thanks for supporting the channel for the first time. Great to have you. Mukbang says, thanks for recommending Gem Mint. He's great. When, if ever, will you two collaborate? Well, here's the thing. For those of you who don't know, Gem Mint is a channel on YouTube, and our impresario there, he calls his fans Geminites, and Gem Mint has a whole collection of Marvel omnibuses, and he's got, I probably have 20% of his collection. I think he has every Marvel omnibus made, which I would want too. Like, just so you know, like, here's a Marvel omnibus, and this is all of Steve Gerber's Howard the Ducks, and these are beautiful hardcovers, and they're nice paper, and they're recolored, and I'm sick of my comic book collection. That's why I want to get rid of it. But my comic books that I like, I love the Marvel omnibuses. Now, unlike Gem Mint, like I bought, before there were all the omnibuses, like House of M, there was individual, I don't know if you can see them, but like, here are 3 individual Marvel hardcovers. This is like the House of M hardcovers. They were done. Now, I don't know what Marvel was doing. I mean, they published them like this in these hardcovers, and then they went back, and a lot of these individual comics, or these individual hardcovers that I bought, were later collected into omnibuses. So I have a ton of these hardcovers, which Gem Mint has bought all of these hardcovers. I mean, when they collect these individual hardcovers, like the Kurt Busiek and George Perez's Avengers, like I have 5 or 6 hardcovers of them. Well, Gem Mint has the omnibus editions, which I would love to get, but then I'd have to rebuy these, and I can't justify, rebuying these just in a new format. But sometimes they add different pages and things like that. Hang on. So anyway, in addition to those omnibuses that he has, and he's got this beautiful setup. It's great. I envy him. He also reviews statues and things, and I really like him. I like his vibe. I mean, he's the kind of guy that I wish I was friends with. So would I collab with him? Sure. I just don't know him. I've never met him. I just support his channel. I always watch his reviews. I just watched his Berserk. He did a review. He has a huge Berserk statue. It's so funny. Elizabeth does not like statues. She's like, I don't understand why do you like these statues? They're just dust collectors. I'm like, we were watching it this morning. I'm like, look at how badass this statue is. Wouldn't you want this? This thing is awesome. Anyway, so Mukbang, I don't know if we will collaborate. Joker sends in a tip and says, Robin, the Bane Syndicate for weeks has been in full production making masks for the people of Gotham. We'll be handing them out soon. It won't just be a different Gotham. It'll be a stranger Gotham. That's very funny. Miguel Ian sends in a tip and says, speaking of CBS, are you watching the CBS Sunday night movie? There's commercials, but as a kid of the 80s, I love it. Raiders was awesome, and looking forward to Gump, Titanic, and Last Crusade. Only way to make it better would be Jiffy Pop and Pan and Scan. Ooh, did they put them on in their original aspect ratio? You're never going to get me to watch network television and watch a movie, especially when I own the Blu-rays of them on my shelf. So, yeah, I don't think so. But I think that's cool. I think it's cool that that's what goes on. I'm glad everybody's liking that. See, I grew up in that era, and I hate commercials, and I just was like, ugh. But I love that people are getting that kick, that throwback to a simpler time. Roger Green sends in a super chat and says, hey, Rob, just bought Parker Lewis Can't Lose on Blu-ray. The show is miles ahead of its time, editing-wise, still fun to watch. I loved Parker Lewis Can't Lose. You know what? I would buy that on Blu-ray. I love that show. Wow. I didn't know it was on Blu-ray, Roger. I would get that show. I mean, that might be my favorite teen comedy at the time ever. I love that. 200 Watt Studio sends in a super chat and says, for the next movie night, do Touch of Evil. Not a bad choice. Touch of Evil's a good one. That is not a bad one. Alexander Wilson sends in a tip and says Viacom CBS's domestic streaming and digital video revenue was up 51% to 471 million. Streaming subscribers were up 50% to 13 million. From their recent earnings, any thoughts? It looks like it's going in an upward projection. Well, yeah, as I was talking about, I think it is. I think it's good that it is doing that, but we'll see. Again, the only thing that drives subscriptions to streaming services, only thing, is programming. People subscribe because they want to get the programming that's on the streaming platform. If the streaming platform isn't providing programming, nobody's going to subscribe. So when they have things like Picard, they get subscribers. If they don't have good new programming, they won't. So, I'd like to see them succeed. I think teaming up with Paramount's great. And I think a byproduct of having a streaming service where Star Trek is going to live, that's where we should see. I'd love to see Deep Space Nine and Voyager turned into 2 or 4K HD. They need to do it. It's just, who's going to pay for it? Well, if you have a streaming service with subscribers, that's how it gets paid for. And immediately, the problem is, when you've already got these shows streaming, what's the incentive? But the incentive is they're going to look a million times better. That's what the incentive is. And it'll work for, the next 100 years. Bane sends in a tip. Thank you, Bane. I appreciate that. Stephen Foley sends in a super chat. Hello, Stephen. Hey, Rob. A friend and I were listing movies with Hollywood in the title, and I noticed 2 of my favorite comedies on the list, Hollywood Nights and Hollywood Shuffle. I own a Blu-ray of Hollywood Nights. I love Hollywood Nights. It's a comedy from, I think, the early 80s. I used to watch it on cable all the time. I had to buy it on Blu-ray. I love Hollywood Nights, and of course, Robert Townsend. I love Hollywood Shuffle as well. That's interesting. Listing movies with Hollywood in the title. I wonder how many you came up with. Now that I'm thinking about them, but I've seen both of those movies and I like them. Riddler sends in a tip along with Bane. Bane and the Riddler are here, which is pretty cool. I have more letters, ladies and gentlemen. More letters. And I have quite a few, actually. Let me dip back into the letters and see what people have to say here. This one comes from Lauren Toy. Lauren Toy writes this. Hi, Rob. I've been watching your videos for about the last 2 or 3 months, and I've recently started to go back and watch your episodes from 2019. I was pleasantly surprised to learn about your background. Specifically, you were born and raised on Mercer Island, Washington. Well, I was born in the Swedish hospital up on Capitol Hill, but I was living on Mercer Island since I was a week old. I was pleasantly surprised to learn about your background. Specifically, you were born and raised on Mercer Island, Washington from the late 60s to the late 80s. I was born and raised in Seattle in the early 70s and still reside here. My specific comment is, I'm old enough to remember the old UA 150 cinema on 6th Avenue, 6th and Blanchard, the greatest movie theater ever. I remember my parents taking me and my older siblings to watch the Star Wars trilogy during their first runs. I also remember the old Coliseum movie theater in downtown Seattle where I saw Flash Gordon and countless other movies, including Roller Coaster and Sense-Around. And the Broadway Theater on Capitol Hill before it was turned into a Rite Aid, where I saw Ridley Scott's Legend at the Broadway Theater. A question for you. As a movie aficionado, did you ever patronize Scarecrow Video in the U District to find that obscure title your neighborhood video store did not carry? Keep up the great work, and I look forward to more dope discourse and discussions of verisimilitude and imagination. Well, Lauren, I have to tell you, I have never once been in Scarecrow Video. And I will tell you this, from 1980 to 1988, I was very much involved with the Seattle home video scene. I started working at Silver Platters. Well, I should start with Video Space. I worked at Video Space on 2 different occasions under 2 different regimes. And Video Space was a video store chain. It was first in Magnolia video hardware, and then it moved over across from Bellevue Square. And that was one of the premier video stores in the United States. When it first started, it was in 1980, and it was owned by Weston Nishimura, who founded the VSDA, the Video Software Dealers Association of America. And I worked for Video Space from on and off from 1980 through 1984. And I'll tell you a story. This is the first time I loved working at Video Space. I loved it. That job meant more to me than you can possibly know. And when I was 16 years old, I was selling VCRs for $1,000, making some good money. And I helped open, like, there was a downtown Video Space and on 4th Avenue, and I helped open that store. You know, I was 16, and one day I went to we had an RCA CED disc player that was for rental, but nobody ever rented it, so they sold it to me for $50, believe it or not. So I go down to pick it up, and I just walked into the back room because I had set up the store, and the manager there, a new manager whom I never met, didn't know who I was and saw this kid, because everybody who worked at video stores back then was like in their 30s because we were selling equipment and stuff. And so I was this kind of whippersnapper kid working as 16, and this guy freaked out and detained me. And I said, no, I work at videos. I'm one of the oldest employees, even though I was 16. I'm one of the oldest employees of the company. He didn't know, so he was embarrassed. So what happened was the guy that had brought me on the second time, this guy Phil Shane, who's the general manager, he left, and this guy was promoted. And I come into work one day, and it was the day, whatever the exact date was, you can find out because I can tell you, it was the day that Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes opened. And it was the first time I took out this girl. It was the first date I had with this girl named Marina that I still know. It was our first date. We were going to meet at the theater, and I was at work. And this guy who took over as the new general manager, who hated me from the moment I embarrassed him, took me into the office. And I was the oldest employee of the company, even though I was 16. And he said to me, he goes, well, I think your time with the organization has come to a close. And I'm like, wait, what? I mean, this job was my life. And he said, yeah, we're just going to make some changes around here, and we're letting you go. Don't think of it as being fired, though. Think of it as being let go. And I was like, one, I didn't know what the difference was. And two, there was no reason why this guy just didn't like me. And it wasn't, I love that store more than, I kept that store running more than anybody. But then it was interesting, after I left Video Space, I don't know if you remember, like SRO theaters, like the Grand Cinemas Alderwood, I went to work with my friend Craig Hyland, and we went to work on what was at the time the first video store inside a movie theater, which was at the SRO Grand Cinemas Alderwood, and we spent months picking we wanted the best collection of foreign films, the best collection of movies we could ever get, and we did. Craig and I did that. We curated the entire video store's collection of films, and that was fun. But Scarecrow Video, I don't think existed, or maybe it existed in some other form. I've never been in Scarecrow Video. So I know exactly where it is. I've driven by it when I visited Seattle, but I've never gone in. So, I mean, obviously I love Scarecrow Video, and I think it's great that they turned it into a nonprofit, because there's a lot of things that they have that you can't get anywhere else. So thanks for writing in, and thanks for letting me be self-aggrandizing for a while. But yeah, I could write a book on the whole Seattle home video scene from 1980 to 1988. It was very interesting. And I wound up, my last job was at Silver Platters. I was the manager and buyer of the laser video disc division of the store. Lauren goes on and sends in another letter. Hi, Rob. There was one other question I forgot to ask in my initial letter. Do you have any insight as to why Paramount canceled their licensing agreement with the FASA gaming company? FASA was, if you remember, Garen Gillam opened up a FASA Star Trek gaming module for the Star Trek, the role-playing game, the 34-year-old gaming module on our 400th show. I always felt FASA produced great source material for the Star Trek universe, and that intellectual property could have been used to build the Star Trek world, especially for the movie franchise with the TOS characters. I think this could have helped avert the disaster that was Star Trek V. Well, you know, FASA played a big role in the Axanar fan film project. I'm a huge fan of that game system. I loved those games. I don't know. I think what happened was, when Star Trek The Next Generation came about, and I know FASA moved into that, they started to really get serious about licensing, and I think it was probably, with Next Generation getting bigger, it was probably a casualty of that, but I don't know. I really don't know. I have no idea. That's a really interesting question. Brian Eng sends in a letter, and he says, very interesting hearing your story about your experiences with Robin Armstrong yesterday. In particular, when he called you his assistant and you quit. Do you think this could have been your tapestry, your TNG Season 6 Episode 15 moment, and if you didn't quit, your life would have changed for the better or worse? Otherwise, do you have a tapestry moment? I actually do have a tapestry moment, but not this one. When I went to work for Robin Armstrong, I found him to be a very impressive human being. He was obviously very smart. He was a family man. He had deep convictions. He was religious, but I liked his brand of religiosity. I really admired him and respected him, and he'd made the movie Pastime that starred William Russ and Noble Willingham, and I really appreciated him as a filmmaker. And even though when he quit Free Willy 6 weeks before production, that should have been to me a red flag, but it wasn't, because I admired what he did. And I was only hired to basically work in production, pre-production and a little bit of production, and that was it. So I went to work for him. My problem when I worked with Robin Armstrong is what we did was he relied heavily on me because I had worked in development. I had worked I'd read scripts for studios and agencies at this point. So he basically had me start his entire development apparatus to find scripts. And during this time, he was offered movies. I think he was offered Mighty Ducks. I want to say it's Mighty Ducks 2. He was offered Mighty Ducks 2 and Cool Runnings, offered them to direct while I was working for him. Now, if he had done those, then I would have been working within the studio system as somebody in my early 20s. You know, we're talking 24, I think. And that's what I was looking to do. I wanted to find people that I didn't ever think that he would turn down greenlit studio projects, but he did. And then, as I told you, at the same time, we were actively canvassing Hollywood, and we were telling, like, I would set up screenings of Pastime. I would pack them with writers. Like, I'd have a theater full of writers. We would give a speech. I would get up and give a speech and introduce him in my early 20s, talking about how our mandate was to find great character-driven scripts that were meaningful, that added to the tapestry of human existence, basically. And I would do that, and we would have these writers, and I would meet with writers all day, and I would read scripts all day, and I was really working with somebody that I really thought was interested in making movies. And he kept putting it off. And the script that I found that I really wanted to make was Connie Burge's Turn and Burn. Never got made, but it was a script about waitresses in Hollywood and their lives, the travails, and I thought it was a manageable. It was a great film that would have roles for, I think, 4 great female actresses at the time. And, you know, he just was always reluctant to pull the trigger because he'd made Pastime, which it was a really good movie. Miramax had put it out, but let's face it was very small. And I think he was afraid of having some kind of a sophomore slump. And he just kept not pulling the trigger, not taking these jobs. And I knew, even then, having come from the studio, I mean, luckily my second job was working at Warner Brothers. I worked for 2 years at Warner Brothers, and I saw how a major motion picture studio works from the inside out. I worked for the senior vice president of production, and even though I was a management trainee, I was basically a glorified PA, I definitely kept my eyes and ears open. I was reading, I learned how to read backwards. The stuff that I knew at that time, the things that I was privy to as far as studio politicking and all that was concerned was fascinating. It was amazing. It was amazing. But it was really frustrating working for him. And then one day, and keep in mind, I was at the forefront of this. I was bringing in these writers. I was running these meetings. I was running these screenings. And I was his development executive. I had a business card to that effect. I was not his assistant. And I think it was born out of frustration and all of that. And when he called me his assistant, I just snapped. And I finally was like, I quit because that was what he really thought. And he was playing at this. You know, so many people in Hollywood just play at it. And I'd seen that before, even though I was, 24. And I hated that. I hated people that play that game. They'd rather just be in development for the rest of their lives and talk about their deals and this, that, and the other thing. But they don't make anything. I hate that. I hate it. What good is that? And we had great opportunities. And Connie Berg went on and changed. Connie Berg. She went on and created Charmed. She had great success. We were smart that we found the script. I was smart that I found this script. And I wouldn't call it a tapestry moment because after I left there, I went to work for Full Moon, and I had a much better time. And I might not but that was the problem. I didn't achieve any great commercial success. And Robin Armstrong never made a feature film after that. He never made a feature film. He didn't do it. He never pulled the trigger. But I do have a tapestry moment that I can't share with you now. It's something it would take too long to explain. But yes, there is a moment I regret. I don't know if in the long run it would have made that much difference in my life, but it would have made a difference in the short run, which is what I needed it to have done back then. So yeah, but it's always an interesting question. Always an interesting question. Let's see. This one comes from Muad'Dib again. Hey Rob, I wanted to talk a little bit about movie rankings. I've never really thought too much about, say, my top 10 or 25 all-time movies, etc. But this year I decided I was going to start ranking all the new movies of 2020. Well, that didn't work out so well. But since I've been working at home during this pandemic, I've had lots of flexibility in my time, and I've spent a lot of that thinking back on my last 4 decades of movie watching. This led me to a website where you're able to rank certain movies against other ones that you've seen. Or you can designate that you haven't seen a particular movie, and it starts compiling a list of your all-time ranked movies. Surprisingly, my list is over 2,000 movies. And my sincerest guess is that there are many more people who have probably seen many more movies than that. The website tends to rehash their offerings most of the time to more popular movies over the years, but will periodically pull out a very random one that I had completely forgotten about. It's been really eye-popping to realize how many movies I've seen maybe only once in my life, but still kind of remember, and how many I watched over and over again in my younger years, but since I've also forgotten about, and how many more movies I've seen many parts of, but never actually watched all the way through. It got me thinking about how different movie watching has been over the last maybe 2 decades than the 2 before it. I think as movie platforms have grown, and then of course the advent of streaming, there's just so much more available that it has gotten much more difficult to keep up. I remember so often as a kid staying up late on weekends and having movies on the few networks available showing over and over again, or oftentimes they would have a few movies as like Saturday matinees or standard channels or just on standard channels, or just a single service like HBO acted as a portal to all the recent home releases as there weren't a million other streamers. And of course there was always the buy to try weekly trips to Blockbuster. I'm sure if I were to include my list of movies that I'm aware of in the synopsis and have at least seen some of, that my list would be more than twice as long, but I'm trying not to cheat. And then, of course, there are quite a few of the animated movies I've watched with my kids growing up, but many more dozens of those that don't seem to be in their registry. The thing I feel most revelatory about is how many of my absolutely beloved movies there are. If you'd asked me a few weeks ago how many movies would be my favorites of all time, total up to, I probably would have guessed somewhere between 25 and 50, but as I go down my list, there are movies that I absolutely adore ranked at 200 or 300 or even 400. Now, the ones toward the bottom of my list are honestly the ones that I've seen but probably have no desire to ever see again, but there's movies that I will certainly enjoy again, even into the low to mid thousands. It's just really, really crazy how much great and informative entertainment there has been over the years. Just out of curiosity, if you had to guess, how many movies have you probably watched in your lifetime? Based on the anecdotal information I've gleaned over the past couple of weeks from my own experience, I would wager you've probably seen close to 5,000, maybe more. Anyway, good times indeed. I want to close with an epiphany I had just recently. Growing up, it wasn't all movies. There was tons and tons of TV in there as well, and almost every night we had the double whammy of Wheel of Fortune followed by Jeopardy! There was rarely an evening that they were not playing in my house. I always found Wheel of Fortune relatively pedestrian, but still fun, but then always really looked forward to Jeopardy! I was never very great at answering the questions, but I always appreciated how my mind felt much more stimulated, especially after losing a number of brain cells having watched Wheel of Fortune. Almost every single day I watch John's show, followed by your show, and I absolutely feel the exact same way about those two in relation. Yours is definitely the Jeopardy to John's Wheel of Fortune. I like that. I enjoy them both for what they are, but I always come away from yours feeling much more stimulated, and I appreciate the time and effort that you put up every single day into giving us great content. Thanks, Rob, and keep it up, my man. Well, Muad'Dib, I want to thank you for that. You know, it's interesting. People are always comparing and contrasting John and my show, but one of the things that I like about doing John's show is it's a topical movie news show where we discuss topics of the day or the day before. So, and then people write in, which, I always like. I like the component, the interactivity between the viewers is one of my favorite things. But for me, I mean, I don't, everybody's doing movie news, and I like to sort of talk about movie news about what it means. Like, look, with CBS All Access now being morphed into basically what is going to be a Paramount CBS new channel, Showtime, I see it as something that will have repercussions for Star Trek, but also a lot of other things. And I like to discuss more of what it all means, like place it in context, because that's just how it interests me. I mean, movie news is movie news, but that's what John's brand has always been. He talks about movie news. And I love doing it. I love that he has me on a show. I mean, we've been doing it now. My God, I think in August, John Schnepp will have been gone for 2 years, coming up in July. And I will have been on John's show for 2 years, which is a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's strange having just celebrated last month my 5 years on YouTube. So yeah, but I think it's Wheel of Fortune to Jeopardy. I like that. I think that's great. Yeah, very much so. So thanks for that. I think that's what a cool thing. Jeffrey Mao is here. Haven't heard from Jeffrey Mao in a long time. Greetings, Rob. Well, it's been a while since I've written you a letter. You'd think I'd have plenty of time considering the quarantine, but I've been busier than ever. My coworker suddenly quit, so I'm practically doing everything now, and I have the kids' schoolwork to do. Did you do your kids' schoolwork for them? So it's been pretty nuts. Also, our man, among several in England, Dean Mikitich, mentioned that tomorrow, 8th of May, is VE Day. It's also my birthday, and Harry Truman's as well. And we have 1 week to go until your birthday. What I have had on my mind is a problem I find in film storytelling. That is, trying to set up a swerve or twist on the audience, but in doing so you create a plot hole or logic problem due to the visual nature of the narrative. I'll use 3 examples from famous movies to discuss this. The first one I've mentioned in a previous letter, and that is about the issue with the construction delays on the Death Star 2 in Star Wars Return of the Jedi. In the beginning of the film, Darth Vader arrives on the Death Star 2 and declares to the clearly apprehensive Moff Gergerard that he will put you back on schedule. He then announces that the Emperor is arriving as well and that he is most displeased with your apparent lack of progress. So clearly it's established that they're behind schedule. Gergerard doesn't have enough men. Why can't women construct the Death Star also? Blah, blah, blah. We later find out that the rebels have acquired intelligence on the Death Star at great cost to the life of the Bothans. Their intel indicates that the Death Star is not operational. Later, when the Emperor does arrive, nothing is mentioned or brought up about any construction delays. The Emperor is fully aware of the operational status of the Death Star, apparently even more so than the man in charge of the place. He himself orchestrated the intel falling into the hands of the rebels. So my question is, was the earlier conversation between Gergerard and Vader legitimate or a put-on? If it was legitimate, then the writers clearly just either forgot about this or decided, it's not important. We have had a massive battle that we have to get to. Well, remember, okay, sure, everyone ends up forgetting about it at the end, but if it wasn't legitimate and Vader and Gergerard were acting, who are they acting for? Only the audience, as no one else appeared to be privy to the conversation. I almost wish that they had made a Rogue 2 about Bothan spies. They could have planted a spy on the Death Star 2 itself, and the Bothans have very keen hearing. They could have intercut that scene from Jedi with the scene from the new film showing the Bothan spy disguised as a stormtrooper hearing the Vader-Gergerard conversation and using that as their proof that the Death Star is behind schedule. It still wouldn't have worked out very well, but if Rogue One is going to try and retcon the apparent plot hole, then why not Rogue 2? The next film that has this problem is one of your favorites, Basic Instinct. What? Now, actually, you know what? Since you're going into Basic Instinct, let's talk about this. Now, just because, remember, when the Emperor says this battle station is fully operational, he's talking about the primary weapon. I mean, the entire Death Star is not finished. So I think when Vader comes to see Gergerard, Gergerod, when he comes to see Gergerod, I think he's absolutely being totally sincere. The Death Star is behind schedule. But I don't even think Gergerod even knows that the primary weapon is active. I think the Emperor, he trumps Gergerod. Gergerod's a functionary. What the Emperor does is make one call and say, bruh, we need to get that weapon online. Don't worry about the rest of the Death Star, but don't tell anybody. Don't tell your commanding officer. Let it be a surprise. Problem solved. But, in the beginning, Vader shows up as an advanced scout. He knows the Emperor's coming. He probably knows what's up. And he wants to put the fear of God into these people to straighten them out before the Emperor arrives. And Vader's in on it too. Vader knows the primary weapon's there. Vader knows a lot. Because, he's been looking for Luke. And the Emperor knows he's been looking for Luke. They're in cahoots. So I think that he's putting the fear of God into Gergerod. And that's Gergerod knows what's up. Like, be scared. But he just doesn't know everything that's up. So they're not acting. I think that Vader is legitimately saying, there's a lot of other shit you got to build here. I mean, look at how the Death Star 2 is unfinished. That's the way I always saw it. My next film that has this problem is one of your favorites, Basic Instinct. Now, it's been a while since I've seen the film. I'm looking forward to that Studio Canal 4K, though. Some of the details are a little hazy, but the gist is that in the beginning, we see the rocker dude, Johnny Boz, murder victim, and the murderess in bed having sex. We don't see her face, but her hair. The mystery is who's the killer. We're misled into thinking it's Catherine Trammell's girlfriend, but actually it's Catherine herself. During the end of the film, we see Nick finding a wig. I think he finds it. Or the camera just shows the wig. So now we know the murderer was wearing a wig. Okay, here's the problem, though. Why would she wear a wig? Whom is she trying to fool? She knows she's going to kill the guy, so the wig is only to fool us, the audience. I'm sure that both Verhoeven and Nesterhaus were probably aware that this was a plot hole, but they figured that they had to show the murder, so they had to have some way to hide the murderer's identity. I don't know. I mean, that doesn't necessarily bother me. Because the whole movie you're playing fast and loose anyway. But I don't know. I mean, I think that he finds a wig because maybe, women wear wigs, they party. I don't know. I never saw that as I have to think about that, but I've never seen that as a plot hole. Because you pretty much know Catherine Trammell's the killer, even though they try and convince you at the end it's Jean Triplehorn, but come on. We know it's not her. Anyway, my last example is from The Dark Knight Rises, which has a slew of plot holes, yes, but this one is pretty bad. So while Bruce is holed up in Bane's Lazarus Pit prison, he gets a visit from, I guess, Ra's al Ghul's ghost? I don't know if he's imagining it or not, but clearly it's not the actual man. Nonetheless, Ra's and Bruce have a conversation. A child escapes from the prison. The child's gender is deliberately vague as we're being deceived into thinking the child is Bane, but it's actually Raz's daughter, Talia. Later on, Talia turns on Bruce, revealing her true identity. For people in the audience who didn't know about Talia from the comics, we're supposed to be surprised. However, the problem is that Bruce is not seeing what we, the audience, are seeing. We're seeing the girl whom we were led to think was the young Bane climbing out. He's first imagining a conversation with, actually it's Ra's al Ghul. You've written it, Ra's al Ghul, who is telling a flashback story. Again, I think this is a case where Nolan must have been aware that this was a plot hole, but he wanted to maintain the mystery of who was the child in order to swerve us to think that Bane was the main villain and not Talia. Personally, I think it was a mistake to make her the main villain in the first place, but that's another letter. In a movie, when character A is telling a flashback story to character B cannot be privy to the visual details of what we as the audience are seeing. Character B can only draw out the scene in his or her own mind. Many times, as we, the audience, have more information than the characters themselves, we have a contract with the filmmakers who say, hey, audience, I'm going to let you in on something that no one in the story knows. However, the filmmaker breaks that contract when they take advantage of the audience privilege and use it to fool us. They show us something only we could have seen, then reveal it to be false in the story itself, when the characters themselves could not have known or observed the information we saw. A more attentive filmmaker would have decided instead to either not show us the important clues or figured out a way to not show part of it so that we don't feel like we were cheated. Well, that's all I have. Maybe you have a few other examples of the same problem. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Look, I think this happens all the time. I think the thing that I hate the most, because it wasn't in the book, is in Silence of the Lambs, when they lead you to believe that the SWAT team is going one place and it's absolutely going somewhere else. I thought that was a total cheat, and it certainly wasn't in the book that way, and I hate that. I hated that at the end of the movie. And then, Jodie Foster finds out that it's Jodie Foster who's gone to James Gunn's house and the actual authorities haven't. I don't like that. I thought that was a total audience manipulation. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think, look, The Dark Knight Rises, I actually like The Dark Knight Rises, but it has so many plot holes, which I honestly don't get. Sometimes Christopher Nolan confuses me. The end of Interstellar, having read the original Jonathan Nolan draft that Spielberg is going to direct, it has a very, very, very different... Actually, the latter half of the script is very different. And I agree with you. I don't like... I mean, Basic Instinct does play fast and loose. And so does The Dark Knight Rises. I mean, they're showing us things and they're just not telling us the truth. And I don't necessarily like that. Usually you do that and just don't reveal someone's face. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I feel about it beyond I think it's cheating. And I don't like it when people are cheating. I don't like it at all. It bothers me. So I feel your pain there, and I like that letter. I thought that letter was good. A fine letter it was. Anyway, where are we now? Where are we at now? Dean Mikitich, our man Dean, sends a letter in. Hi, Rob, and the Post-Geek Singularity. Yesterday, you were asked if Logan will ever be on Disney+, and you answered that it was unlikely in its current form. Also, with Disney now owning 20th Century Fox and their back catalog, it is unlikely the majority of those films will make it on Disney+, as that streaming service is catering more to family-friendly content, and the majority of 20th Century Fox films are not family-friendly. They'll mostly end up on Hulu+. This got me wondering about Disney. They made films that are not family-friendly. Some of you younger members in the Post-Geek Singularity might be might not remember that Disney has not made a non-family friendly film. In the late 70s and early 80s, however, Disney tried to release films that were a little bit more mature. However, these films were flops. Two of the most well-known are The Black Hole and Tron, which have gone on to be cult classics. Disney deemed that their image was only for kids, so they created a new company to release films that were aimed more at adults. They actually created two, Touchstone Pictures and Hollywood Pictures. The first Disney films to be released under the Touchstone banner was Splash, but for that film to be on Disney+, it has been edited. I'm sure there are a few more that go on to Disney+, like Adventures of Babysitting. But what about the Touchstone more mature films? Films like Shoot to Kill, DOA, Pretty Woman, Con Air, Face Off, Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, just to name a few, go to Disney+? The answer is that it's a big fat no. You're right. These films, like Logan, will most likely make their way to Hulu+, which is all well and good for those living in the States and Canada, but what about us living in the rest of the world? Living in the UK, we don't have Hulu, let alone Hulu+, and it's unlikely those films will ever make their way onto the Europe version of Disney+. So, Rob, as we don't have Hulu here in the UK, do you think Disney will do deals with Netflix and Amazon Prime to show this content? Or do you think that they'll launch Hulu+ here at a later date? Peace and long life, Dean Mikitich. A good question, Dean. Look, I think Disney, if they can make a buck, they will. They're going to figure out how to do all this. I don't know what they're going to do. Right now in the States, Disney has been licensing movies that were Touchstone and Hollywood Pictures. Movies like Down and Out in Beverly Hills. Those are movies that are being released. Ruthless People are being released. They're being licensed out to like Kino Lorber, which is crazy. So it's kind of weird and wacky. So I would imagine you will see them, but I don't know what they're going to do. It's really interesting. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. Let's see. Let me go back to where I was here. Jordy Lyons asks if there's any change on your opinion of Watchmen. I think you mean the HBO series. No, I think that I really thought the show was intriguing, but I didn't like the end of it. I thought there's a lot of really interesting stuff, but it was sometimes, again, too clever for its own good. But I think it was a worthy look. There's a lot about it I love, but ultimately, here's my biggest problem with Watchmen at the end, and it's a thing that I keep coming back to. When John Osterman suffered the intrinsic field experiment, he basically got locked in to the room where they were doing this intrinsic field experiment accidentally, and he couldn't get out. And the field turned him into Dr. Manhattan. This was something that was done in the 50s. So in The Watchmen, we have two factions of people that want to create their own Dr. Manhattans. They want to turn themselves into Dr. Manhattan. Well, why don't they just recreate the intrinsic field experiment that makes Dr. Manhattan, that turned him into Dr. Manhattan in the first place? They don't. They've got, I mean, you know, our favorite genius, Ozymandias' daughter, she builds this gigantic clock machine in the middle of, you know, Tulsa, because it's geologically inert there, to steal, to destroy Dr. Manhattan. Well, how do you know that's going to work? Like, if you want to turn yourself into Dr. Manhattan, why don't you just recreate the intrinsic field experiment, which probably is very well documented, and just do that again? I know it's a weird thing, but so I think Watchmen was good, but it wasn't great. There's a lot of really interesting stuff, though, which is pretty good. Roger Green sends in a super chat and says, the first and only Laserdisc I ever saw was Star Trek VI on vacation in the Netherlands. Love that you can see a movie undubbed. Spent a whole lot of money on importing X-Files VHS from the UK. Yeah, you know, it's weird. Dubbing movies drive me crazy. Unless you're watching, I don't know why, I am partial to Asian martial arts films. I don't mind dubbing in those movies, but every other movie I have to watch. Even Godzilla movies are so much better when you watch them in the original language and subtitled. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, for World War II VE Days, the 75th anniversary tomorrow, I'm going to watch The Longest Day. I'm amazed by the harbor scene, which is a 2-minute panning crane shot over the harbor attack. I can't imagine the work that's set up for the second take. Ooh, and he includes a link. So I, too, am going to include a link in the live chat. So here's a link to that shot, I would imagine. So yeah, Stubble, I'm going to watch probably a little Winds of War action. Dirty Nerdy's here and says, if remastering the whole of Deep Space Nine and Voyager is so expensive, why not just get it crowdfunded, or just release the episodes for streaming and Blu-ray at a later time, or just remaster certain popular episodes like The Way of the Warrior, Scorpion, or Dark Frontier? Dirty Nerdy, it's too hard to do that. The reason, you have to set up an entire assembly line to make it all work, and it's a ton of work. You have to go back and you have to get all the original negative. You have to get the editorial notes first. You have to scan that negative. You have to color time that negative. Then you have to remix the sound, and then you have to recomposite all the effects work. It's an enormous amount of work. And if you're going to go do it, you know, they did an experiment. They had already pulled the trigger on it. They put out that disc that had Way of the Warrior and not Way of the Warrior, Sins of the Father and Inner Light on it to gauge interest. There was a lot of interest. They knew they were going to do it. It's people don't understand. It was a team of 30 people working for 4 years, every single day, work day on it. It's an enormous amount of work, and you're looking at it's $20 million a series, so it's a $40 million proposition to do Voyager and to do Deep Space Nine. There's never been any. There's no crowdfunding. There's no way you could get anybody to crowdfund that much money, unfortunately. Hassan is here. Hola, master. What is the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you at work? I dipped a professional camcorder in water once, but I had a very logical reason to do that. The most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to me at work. You know what? The most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me at work was on Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. And it was my second day on the job, when I was sent to the set of Nightmare on Elm Street 5 to pick up whatever the art department had left there. And one of the things that I did, this was so dumb, I had my Ford Dually pickup truck, and I was filling up the pickup truck with all the kind of crap that they had. And one of the things they had was a hospital gurney. So I had the hospital gurney, and rather than turn it upside down so it wasn't on its wheels, I had it wheels up, so I could fit a bunch of shit underneath the gurney. But what I didn't do was I didn't tie it down enough. I should have just tied it down so it wouldn't have moved. That's pickup trucks have things. I didn't think about it. I packed everything in there and thought that was enough. And so I'm driving back from the A1 Globe building is on the corner of basically Venice and Robertson in LA. And it was a place where they used to shoot a lot of stuff. Maybe they still shoot stuff there. I don't know. But this was the summer of 1989. So 31 years ago. So I'm driving back, and there's a freeway on-ramp right by the A1 Globe building. You cross Robertson, you go onto the freeway, and you're getting onto the 10 where you go onto the 405, and I was shooting up to Valencia where the production office was. So there was a guy, so as I'm going to cross over Robertson to get on the freeway on-ramp, and a guy comes just whipping out really fast and he is making his way onto the on-ramp and basically cut me off. I slam on the brakes, and the gurney breaks free, rolls forward because I slammed on the brakes, and smashes through the back window of the Ford pickup truck, smashing the window. I mean, Alexander dumbass, right? I mean, that was it. And I figured, I'm going to have to go explain how I didn't tie the gurney down, even though I knew better. I figured, things shift when you're in a truck, right? And then, because it was summer and I had the windows rolled down, now the back window is rolled down. As I drive up on, and it's safety glass, so it shatters into a million pieces. So as I get on the freeway, the wind is now whipping through. Both windows are open and the back window, and basically creates a mini cyclone in the truck. And all of the glass that has smashed, it's in the truck, whips up in and just whoosh, my face, and I get glass in my eye. So I had to go back my second day on the job. I'd proven myself so well on the first day. The second day, I have to go back. There's glass in my eye, and I smashed the window of the truck. Now, what I didn't know is that the Americans, the art department doesn't care. They didn't care about this, but I had to go to the doctors because I had to make sure for insurance reasons I didn't have glass in my eye. So that was my second day on the job, and I felt like a total tool. What a douchebag. Never put something on wheels in the back of a truck. Turn it over. So, that was stupid. Yeah. Brandon Shee says, I always thought Spock was an awesome captain in Star Trek 6. I thought so too. He was dope. After Kirk was taken away, Kirk and McCoy, Spock took over. I thought he was great. I loved that. I loved how Spock ran the Enterprise. Absolutely, 100%. I feel you. I'm with you 100%. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to an end of Robservations episode 409. This was fun. It's a fun episode. A lot of great letters. I think that take your fellow imagination connoisseurs' advice to heart. Send me letters about your moms. Send me letters. Did your mom? How does your mom relate to your imagination connoisseurship? Did your mom go to the movies with you? Did she give you special presents? Give me a story about your mom that relates to being an imagination connoisseur for Mother's Day. If you can write them, I guess today or tomorrow, and I'll share them on Mother's Day, or I'll share them when I get them in the lead up. So anyway, I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. I want to thank my moderating staff, beginning with Mike Bodden, of course, Detective Jim Boyers and his wife Heidi. I just hope Heidi's doing well. And then, of course, Greg Smith. I hope Greg's doing well. Louis Yu, who's always there for whining about movies. Jordy Lyons, and, of course, the Richard. And the Richard has watch parties, and if you haven't met the Richard or don't know the Richard, go to the Whining About Movies Facebook page and go to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page and seek out the Richard. And if you like these chats, hit like, and don't forget, look down in the bottom of this description and enter the giveaway for the Bar 9.1, the JBL Bar 9.1 with Dolby Atmos. And it's a pretty cool piece of gear. And once again, thanks to Connie from the Experiential Engagement Department over at Harman International, a subsidiary of Samsung that sells and oversees the JBL brand, for making that possible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. I will be back on the John Campea show tomorrow. I'll be back on this show tomorrow, and we will also be doing another whining about movies, which is exciting. And Elizabeth herself she's got 2 emails, or 2 emails. I can't even speak today. What am I? She has 2. She's the ace, the arbiter of cinematic excellence, and now she's the enchantress of entertainment. So tune in and see what banter we have for you and what movie we have for you tomorrow, which I don't know what it is yet, or I would announce it. And with that, I bring Robservations episode number 409 to an end. And remember, everybody, have a better day. Oh, and don't forget, David Goodman, executive producer of The Orville, 2-hour interview about his entire history of writing for Hollywood, beginning with the Golden Girls in the late 80s and all the way up to what he's doing now. So check that out. And have a better day.